Welcome back, everybody, to another reaction video. Today we're going to go back to our good friend yndyniedel over at the Great War channel. You also see him frequently in my reactions to Sabaton history. Once again, going to be a lot of Great War, World War I content coming to you in the coming weeks and months. Keeping my fingers crossed that nothing gets messed up with travel, and I can keep my plans to go to France sometime in late January. Keeping my eyes open, though, watching the news. We'll see what happens. May have to put it off. I really hope that doesn't happen. But with that in mind, I thought we would dive into their video about the top 10 misconceptions about World War I. As always, if you're new to the channel, I always put the link in the description to the original content creator. I encourage you to support them for the work that they've done on this. I only watch videos that are either highly recommended to me or that are from channels that I already know and love. And unless I say otherwise, these are videos I've never seen before. Occasionally I'll do a reaction to something I have seen, but I'll always let you know that up front. This is my first time seeing this one. Let's go ahead and dive into it.
There's been a lot more coverage of the Second World War than the First, as most of you are no doubt aware. And we've noticed that probably because of that lack of coverage, people have a lot of misconceptions about the First World War, how and where it happened, and who was fighting it. And we're going to try to fix that today.
By the way, if I haven't emphasized this enough, this channel is fantastic. I have not seen most of the videos, but I've seen a lot of them. And they cover the war week by week, but they also do these specials. Like they did one that I watched a while back where he went and visited, I think it was the Mouzargon American Cemetery, which is on my list of places to go when I do go to Eastern France. And it was a great visit, and it was really cool, and I learned a lot to prepare for my own trip. So this is one I'm excited to get into, though.
I'm yndyniedel. Welcome to a Great War special episode, the top 10 popular misconceptions about the war. Number 10, Russia was only a second-grade military power in the First World War.
Never heard that.
Russia may have left the war after the revolution, and certainly the Great Retreat and disasters like the Battle of Tannenberg don't exactly make the Russian military record shine. But the Russian army was anything but a pushover. At this time, 100 years ago, they were just romping through eastern Anatolia, and the Brusilov offensive and the innovative tactics it used came seriously close to knocking Austria out of the war.
Yeah, so let's say this. I mean, Russia gets this reputation as being basically throw manpower at the problem rather than being this well-trained elite fighting force. But that doesn't mean they were pushovers. Did they have some pretty bad fights against the German army? Yeah, but you know what? So did a lot of people. The Germans had one of the best militaries in the world. So comparing the two, you know, I mean, like they said, the Russians really did have their way with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was only a lot of support from Germany that kept that from being a complete disaster on the Eastern Front.
Or even collapsing the entire Austro-Hungarian Empire. It certainly broke the back of their army. The enormous growth and modernization of the Russian military industry by 1916 was also nothing to sneeze at. Number 9, everything has already been said about the war. No.
Oh, no.
New stuff is being discovered all the time, like that Edith Cavell actually was spying for Britain, or that
we're gonna do a video that's actually on my list of videos when I get back into my Forgotten History videos, which I've got my script pretty much done for the last part of the Forgotten History on Reconstruction, but Edith Cavell's on my list. I've got a list of about 5 Forgotten History episodes I want to do, and I've started doing the research on her. Fascinating story, executed by the Germans for spying, and for a long time it seemed like, oh, she was just a nurse. She wasn't spying. Well, she really was. So it's a really cool story to get into. And oh gosh, yeah, I mean, all of history is this way. We are constantly rediscovering or changing our understanding about events that have been talked to death about. Because we make new archaeological discoveries, or there are new understandings of things that are happening, and we put new information together. So there's never a place that we get to where we know everything about something. And World War I, honestly, for as consequential as it was, a world event, I mean, this is one of the most important events in human history. We really don't talk about it that much. Just look at the movies we make about World War II. World War II only happens because of World War I. We don't nearly know enough about World War I.
Falkenhayn's claim that the Battle of Verdun was to bleed France to death is quite likely an invention after the fact.
Yep.
Files are being declassified even now, 100 years after the war. Who knows what we're going to find out? Number 8, the Germans were the bad guys in the war. Really? Since they were the bad guys in World War II and wartime stories of the bloodthirsty Huns circulated in Allied media, they had to be the bad guys, right? And they got all the blame at Versailles in 1919. That has to count for something. Well, not so much. Was it Germany's fault that the whole house of cards came crashing down? That the war escalated into the horror that it did? Not so much more than anybody else in Europe, who all had outdated ideas about the necessity of the war and how to pursue it. And
I will say this. I agree 100%. And if you guys have followed my channel for long, I get really uncomfortable about the whole black and white, good versus evil, good guy, bad guy thing, even in World War II. Do I see the evil of the Nazi regime, for example? Absolutely. But I really don't like labeling every individual German soldier as evil as well. A lot of these guys were just drafted kids that were just trying to stay alive. And I will say this, in World War I, the Germans brought a lot of that reputation on themselves. The massacre of Belgian civilians, for example, the unrestricted submarine warfare, things like that. So it was not without merit. But there are always atrocities on both sides. Americans committed war crimes in World War II, just as the Germans were committing war crimes. I mean, nobody did it on the scale that the Germans and the Japanese did, but there's always going to be evil on both sides.
Sure, you do have episodes like the rape of Belgium, but atrocities were committed by all sides. The Armenian genocide and the massacres committed by the Russians in East Prussia in 1914 spring to mind. Just because somebody is the enemy doesn't mean that they're the bad guy. Sometimes there is no bad guy.
And you talk to soldiers who fought in these wars, and many of them will say the same thing. They'll say, I didn't hate those guys. I was trying to stay alive, and they were trying to kill me, and I was trying to kill them. So, but it was never personal. I mean, sometimes it was. And I think probably more in the Pacific Theater it was, or on the Eastern Front with the Germans and the Russians, like in World War II, probably a lot more personal on both sides because of what went on. But it wasn't always that way.
Sometimes everyone is the bad guy. Number 7, the war in the skies was a gentleman's war.
Sometimes.
The Flying Aces, like the Red Baron and Billy Bishop, they were the rock stars of the war, gliding above the carnage and fighting man to man.
And we've talked sometimes about the closest thing to the idea of knighthood probably comes into play here, but not at all the same chivalrous thing.
Chivalrously, except, again, not so much. They were fighting with machine guns, and they were most often flying in formations by the second half of the war, when the average life expectancy of the pilots could be measured in hours. And never forget, the perfect kill happened when the enemy never saw you coming. Number 6, World War I was a European war, not a world war. Not true. It had its origins in Europe, and there was certainly a lot of the fighting done in Europe, but once the Ottoman Empire joined, you should have a clue how it would spread. Even before that, Japan fought against Germany. The United States and Brazil would eventually join the war. There were battles in the South Pacific and the South Atlantic. Soldiers...
Yeah, you got to remember that even though it is a European war by nature, these European nations that are at war with each other have colonies in Africa. They have colonies in the South Pacific. And like you said, Brazil and Japan and the United States are all belligerents in this war as well.
From every continent, except Antarctica, would fight. And of course, there was fighting all over Africa, mainly by colonial overlords, but there were fronts in Persia, Mesopotamia, Libya, and even the borders of India. Definitely a world war here. Number 5, the war was only fought in the trenches. The trenches are the symbol of World War I, and while they appeared on pretty much every front, the vast trench networks were only really common on the Western Front. In the deserts or the huge open spaces of the Eastern Front, cavalry played a bigger role, and huge trench systems.
Really, probably the last major war that involves large numbers of cavalry. We see some cavalry in World War II, but by that point, tanks had taken over.
Would have been most often impossible to maintain. Number 4, tactics during the war didn't change. It's easy to think that.
Tactics always change in a war. The American Civil War in 1861 bore no resemblance to the war in 1865. 1865 is more like World War I than it is like the beginning of the American Civil War. Every war undergoes these changes, especially in World War I, because you develop tanks in 1916. You've got the advent of poison gas being used. You've got more sophisticated use of planes happening. Submarines become more and more of a factor by the end of the war. Big changes from 1914 to 1918.
Looking at the week-by-week carnage, how we cover it, but if you look at tactics in 1914 and those in 1918, it would be difficult to find many real similarities. The stalemate across the various fronts pretty much forced tactical innovation. Heck, the war saw the advent of mechanized mobile warfare, and certainly the techniques Hitler's Wehrmacht used at the beginning of World War II grew directly out of those used at the end of World War I. Number 3, navies did not play a real part in World War I. Well, the biggest battle in naval history, the Battle of Jutland, happened in World War I.
But I understand why people have that idea, because other than the Battle of Jutland, which was huge, and the future King George VI was an officer there on one of the ships for the British Navy. But I think it's because there weren't many battles like that. Once that battle happened, the Germans basically, kind of withdrew their fleet and kept it close to home for the rest of the war. But the Navy, the Allied Navy, may have been the deciding factor in the war. It was their blockade of German ports that really brought Germany to its knees.
Britain's Atlantic blockade of Germany was a big factor.
That's like the third time in this video that I've said something when I paused, literally seconds before he said it. I swear it's not intentional.
In depriving Germany of supplies, there were countless naval skirmishes all over the war. Germany tried to turn the tide of war with unrestricted U-boat warfare. And if you look at the Mediterranean, the major powers there were using their navies to block each other.
And I'll say this about the unrestricted submarine warfare. It's another one of those things that people use to paint Germany as the bad guys. What choice did they have? I mean, really, if I was in Germany's position, I think I'd have to do the same thing. It's the best naval weapon they've got. They're being blockaded. They can't sustain this war forever without being able to import things into their country. They really had no choice, because you have the U.S., even though they're not a belligerent in the war, they're just sending tons, thousands of tons of supplies to the Allies across the sea. What are you going to do? I mean, I understand why they did it.
There are also great stories of German raiders like the Tomov or the Emden, which you should definitely check out there. Number 2, the German army wasn't defeated in World War I. Yes, they were.
Yeah.
They endured far longer than anyone could have imagined, and their final offensives in 1918 were real forces to be reckoned with. But the state of the army by the summer of 1918 was catastrophic in terms of supplies and morale.
Yeah, and that goes back to the whole blockade thing. The home front was desperate. The Western front was desperate. The Eastern front, the war was basically over because Russia was out of the war. But by this time, the U.S. has gotten large numbers of men, over 1 million men, I think, into the European theater. And so it's really just a matter of time.
And the state of their allies was worse. Austria-Hungary never really recovered after 1916. The Ottoman Empire had huge problems even before the war, and the Bulgarian army collapsed. And the German army did call for a ceasefire before the Allies broke through the Hindenburg Line, which they would have done. Number 1. World War I was mainly fought on the Western Front. There was the Eastern Front, the Serbian Front, the Italian Front, the Salonika Front.
And some of these fronts, I mean, Serbia loses like, what, a third of their entire population in this war? The Italian Front was incredibly bloody when Italy joins the war on the side of the Allies. The fighting in the mountains there was brutal. And obviously, you know, I mean, any war between Germany and Russia on the Eastern Front and Austria, Hungary, and Russia is going to be brutal.
Gallipoli, the Persian Front, the Mesopotamian Front, the Palestine Front, the Libyan Front, the Caucasus Front, the Romanian Front, East Africa, Southwest Africa, Cameroon, the war at sea, the Arab Revolt. Did I miss anything? The Western Front was but a fraction, and not even a big fraction, of the total of the First World War. Okay, well, that is my list for now. Now, no doubt you have many things you disagree with, or many others you'd like to add to the list. Please let us know in the comments. And for anyone new to our channel, you can find over 200 videos about World War I on our channel.
So yeah, definitely check them out. If you have any interest in learning more about World War I, check it out. Indy Nydell is one of my favorite historical storytellers in terms of how he presents the information. I absolutely love it. Could listen to him all day. They're in nice, you know, bite-sized chunks like this, so definitely worth your time. I put a link in the description to this specific video, and we will definitely be doing more of their content. Let me know your thoughts about what we just talked about in the comment section below. Please hit that like button, subscribe if you're new and you haven't already done so. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.